Why did you hire Adam Lightman Bailey, PC?
He was labeled as a fantastic real estate lawyer in New York. I didn't know that yet, and then I did some research and said we absolutely have to hire Adam after I did some searches about Adam and other results he'd gotten. And because of our type of situation in a conflict with a sponsor and building defects, it seemed that he was the perfect representative for the building, one, because he understood the sponsor's perspective and also understood the issue perspective.
What was your role in the building?
I was one of, until I was the fifth person that moved in, or the third resident of the building, and at that point the board had not yet been formed, and we had advocated with the sponsor to get our board representatives as part of the offering plan, and so myself and another person were the condo representatives to the board, which the sponsor unilaterally controlled. We started identifying defects, we started identifying things from other residents as the first 10 or so apartments were full, and that's when we started on a separate campaign to engage Adam. I had organized a meeting for, at that point, 13 or 12 units to all come into Adam's office to meet Adam and discuss what the issues are and what our options were and whether we wanted to engage Adam. And I think every resident came away quite impressed by Adam, so we engaged him as a group of residents prior to engaging him as the board, and then once we took control of the building, we engaged him as the representative for the board.
So what was wrong with your building? What were some of the biggest issues?
Well, the biggest value that we got by working with Adam going through this process is we identified some initial issues. Those issues were relatively minor to what we identified after we hired Adam and after Adam hired Rand to do the reviews. And once we got the engineering consulting report, we really could evaluate, what was important to us, what we could use as leverage, what are, defects, but not necessarily material defects, and things that we otherwise would never have identified. The things that led us to contact Adam were basically, when you buy a new building in New York, the sponsor under the offering plan provided a 6-month warranty. And what was happening is people were identifying issues during that 6-month warranty, and the sponsor was not resolving them in a timely manner. And this was really stupidity of the sponsor, because had they resolved those issues, the people would not have organized to hire Adam, and their ultimate liability would have been much less. So instead, the sponsor ended up paying a lot more. The building's in a much better situation, but we would have never gotten here had the sponsor acted quickly and efficiently to resolve the issue. The issues in the building that led to engagement of Adam were, our lobby floor was not up to par. It looked nice from a distance, but when you got into it, tiles were starting to crack. Caulking in the apartments around the tubs and everything wasn't working. And really the biggest issue and a quality of life issue that led everyone to this point is the flooring. The sponsor installed pretty bad flooring, and actually the flooring itself is what you would expect in a decent apartment. But the sponsor didn't install it properly. They didn't leave gaps along the edges, and therefore floors started buckling, and you could hear the pops because the floor was not properly dried prior to installation. You started seeing large gaps the first winter when the floorboards dried out, and that's the main issue that led everyone to engage them. There was a lot of noise transfer between apartments, which only later did we realize it's because of the fact that no insulation was put in between floors. So that was the main quality of life issues that led people to this process and engage Adam.
Okay, so that's what brought you in the first place. Then what other problems did he find once you got into?
So the flooring remained one of the bigger issues, and a big lump of the goal of the settlement was to resolve the flooring issue. People contributed for legal fees up front to get that, so that was always the highest priority. But once we got in there, we identified that the offering plan said the parapet walls were all new. The parapet walls were not new. And one of the other large pieces of the settlement, something we never would have found out, is the fact that, this part of the settlement, the sponsor's replacing our parapet walls per the offering plan, which should have been done up front and now is being done after the fact. We didn't, the electrical systems were not provided as per the offering plan, irrelevant of whether they were sufficient or not sufficient. what we bought wasn't what they sold. And that's really kind of at the heart of the issue. Our ultimate issues that we identified was roughly $1 million worth of various defects. Obviously, some of them over time were insignificant, some of them were more significant, but some of the larger ones were the engineering, the heating in lobbies, which was missing, and really misrepresentations of the offering plan that we never would have discovered without going through this process. One, because being a board member, the cost of an engineer for this process is quite expensive. And so unless you have some other issues that you need counsel for, you as a board would have a hard time saying we should do this analysis because it's expensive to do up front, and then especially if you are not going to invest to fix the problem, you're not going to do the work.
Okay. So what services did we provide you?
Once we were engaged, Adam really kept us on track, and the other associates and partners at the firm in terms of what our rights were, what our issues were, and really driving the strategy. I do have a level of legal experience myself, so it was a really collaborative environment in that, although Adam and the various associates and partners here had a view of how to do things, I didn't feel like I was sidelined in terms of my views. And we had some, good disagreements that actually led to better results, I think, for both of us. So that's something that was important to me, that I didn't feel like I was being sidelined by the council, but I could also always trust their advice. I should point out that, everyone at the firm was unbelievably responsive. So whenever an issue came up, they were on top of it. If there was dead silence, they were okay with that. It was a really good relationship. We had some slow points and we had some starts. And I think, especially when you are on the board, and I'm now the president of the board, and this is your second job and not your primary job, it was great to actually have them keep driving the process when they knew there was momentum, and also know when to slow down in order to let things move through when momentum slowed down, but still re-engage at the right times.
Okay. Did you have to go to the Attorney General with your case?
We did not. We were regularly discussing that as an option. Luckily, we reached a resolution prior to needing to go to the Attorney General, but we were at a position that we were ready to go had we not engaged in a more fruitful conversation.
So did you end up suing at all?
We did not. We went to a position where we tried to put ourselves in a position ready to sue, pretty much present that we're ready to go to the AG's office and institute a suit against the sponsor, and the sponsor decided to start talking to us.
So you ended up with a settlement. What did you get out of the settlement?
Because this process lasted for so long, it went from a stage of individual line items to individual work where we as a building, because we're a smaller 23-unit building, wanted the sponsor to do the work, but wanted to direct who the sponsor would do the work using, because we knew some of the contractors they used were poor. And it would be a lot of effort for us to manage all the projects. The settlement went through several stages into what was offered and what was agreed, where we started with individual lists and individual items and work that sponsor would do and money that they would pay to the building for smaller items. We ended up with a larger lump sum that the building will manage, and it worked out for the better, and a work piece where we got to approve the contractors for the electrical work and the roofing and parapet wall work, and that the sponsor will have to do next summer. And what was useful is we have time limits that were set up for when it has to be done. Both Adam and Lenny fought really hard to make sure that the sponsor had to abide by those timelines, and if they didn't, there would be penalties to pay, which ended up being one of the sticking points for the sponsor, but we still got it included because this gave them the incentive to ensure that they performed.
So compared to what you actually got in the settlement as to what your original goals you were hoping for out of this, ordeal, hiring a lawyer, how does that compare?
That's actually a really good question. I think we got more than we thought we would get, definitely without a lawyer. And we ended up getting everything we expected to get after we got the engineering report and looking at what a reasonable amount would be to ask for. And the fact that the settlement went on for a while, and the fact that the board played good cop and counsel played bad cop really played to our advantage in terms of having a decent relationship with the sponsor where we could talk on a business side and having a relationship where the lawyers could talk from the legal side. In the end, we settled where we wanted to settle when we started the process, which was much higher than what the sponsor initially offered. So the fact that we stuck with it for an extended period of time and continued working through this, it was to our advantage. The legal fees added up more than we expected to, but nonetheless, the lump sum covered that portion to the point that we were comfortable with.
How were you able to get such a great settlement without going to the Attorney General?
I fully attribute that to the work of the lawyers of this firm, particularly Adam and Lenny. They have relationships with a lot of the other counsels, whether it be because they've worked together from an opposing standpoint, whether it's because they've worked together collaboratively. The world of some of these real estate lawyers is relatively small, and the fact that the lawyers have worked together in various times, opposing each other, working together, actually played to our advantage because they had working relationships. They knew what things people could agree to. They knew the lawyers involved knew what the various positions were of the firms in general, and I think Adam's reputation, his experience, was very beneficial in this type of situation where the sponsor did not want any publicity. They wanted to keep this quietly. They had 2 cases of 2 new constructions of the same types of issues represented by different firms. And so, their main reason was to keep this out of the press, and the fact that we had Adam who was ready to not just use the legal system, but use, the court of public opinion and really publicize the sponsor for their defects really played to our advantage.
Did you have any in-person settlement meetings?
We had two in-person settlement discussions. One which we had hoped would lead to the settlement, and then unfortunately I don't recollect why it got blown up, but the numbers were definitely much less than where we were in the final settlement. And then we had a second final settlement meeting where Adam's presence really helped the negotiation and really helped foster a settlement that then led to the business people walking into another room and getting a handshake deal.
What were the biggest obstacles that you faced in reaching the settlement?
Time. and that's where I think, working with Adam Lightman Bailey PC has actually been really beneficial in that they had their view on time and were concerned that the case wasn't moving fast enough. We wanted to move it faster, but also had reservations about moving it too fast, and that ended up being a collaborative experience where it didn't feel like the board was sidelined by the attorney or the attorney giving doomsday scenarios of why you should settle immediately rather than waiting. So it was a nice point that we felt like we had a say in what was happening in the process, and Adam listened to that in the arguments, and so it was collaborative in terms of how we got to the resolution. Time was the biggest obstacle here because, in general, and based on experience in real estate, you want to settle relatively quickly because you never know when your sponsor's going to go belly up. In our situation, had we settled quickly, we probably would have settled for half of what we ended up getting, and that really wouldn't have been enough to cover some of the major issues that we had. And it's one of the reasons why we didn't want to settle quickly. That was probably the biggest obstacle. I think worried about the expense that we were spending to continue this process through was something that our treasurer and as a building we became quite concerned about, whether we could afford this process, and really not showing our hands that we really couldn't afford this process on a true full litigation basis. And I think having people here at Adam Lightman Bailey PC recognize what our limitations were was also very advantageous to us and helped overcome some of those obstacles.
What are the best things that Adam Lightman Bailey PC did to help you reach the goals in the settlement?
Being available to talk. There was a lot of times when, we needed to make decisions as a board, and it was really useful that you could always get Adam or another associate or Lenny, who was primarily working on this case. You could quickly get them on the phone, have a conversation. They made themselves available in the evening so everyone on the board could participate in the calls. and they were thorough in their responses. So we could lay out, here's what the board's view was. Do you agree with this? Why don't you agree? And it was a very collaborative conversation so that we could all feel good about the decisions. We didn't feel like our lawyers were sidelining us. We didn't feel like we didn't have any power, but at the same time, we didn't feel like we were controlling everything against the advice of our lawyers. And I think that was a very useful process.
Are you satisfied with the results you got?
More than satisfied. I think we did better than we expected to do. And in the end, we got what we said what we thought we would end up settling at when we started the process. And I think that's the biggest plus here. One of the things at play in our settlement was not just cash, but an extra unit in the building that the sponsor couldn't do anything with. And that was a tough thing because the sponsor kept on trying to trade that for some insane value. And the key there was, not trading that for any value, not attributing any value and making them throw it in. And we ended up getting them to throw it in, basically, and still got the amounts that we really needed to get everything done. So I think we're more than happy with what we ended up getting settlement-wise, because when you looked at the engineering report, when you looked at what the issues were, we said we'd probably settle at this number, and I think we probably got more than that number, and that's been pretty huge. Something I forgot to mention about a larger issue in the building is the building has 3 duplexes on the first floor. One of the duplexes, actually, the sponsor had to split up into because they didn't create a fire escape for one side of the building. That would never have been identified had we not hired Adam, Lenny, Bailey, PC, and hired engineers to do that. That cost the sponsor an additional amount completely outside of the settlement. So if you compute the total value of cash work plus things they had to do that they did that they otherwise would not have done, we're probably talking $1 million, which has been tremendous for a relatively small building.
So you are a lawyer. In your opinion, is there anything Adam, Lenny, and Bailey PC did better or worse than other law firms you've worked with?
I think the thing they did better was they were responsive. I mean, that's, in these types of relationships, especially when there's negotiation, especially when you're looking for advice on a regular basis, having attorneys that return your calls promptly and also have answers to the issues that you have, and if they don't, immediately telling you that and saying, we'll get back to you, is tremendous value, because without that, you can't make decisions, whether it's from a business side or from a legal side. And then the best experiences I have with attorneys are attorneys that respond to calls and answer questions. And it's amazing how many don't do that. So, so to always have someone available here that would quickly respond, whether it be via email, via phone call, via meeting, conference call, that was tremendous because it allowed us to make decisions much quicker than we otherwise could have. The other advantage is, they were available to answer some of our other questions in the fact that we were a new board, and they were willing to say, okay, let's remove this from the litigation issue and let's talk about some issues that we have as a board, and can you represent us there, and can you assist us and advise us? And they were very open to helping there as well.
Is there anything else we could have done?
I don't think so, short of moving into the building. I mean, and I say that kind of jokingly, but the reality is, the firm and its staff were available at any point. Even to the point of messengering documents to me to get them signed, to get the settlement done, making themselves available and their offices available for settlement meetings if we needed it, for really helping me organize the building before there was any structure to get organized. That kind of advice was invaluable because it was not just a professional relationship, but it was kind of a personal relationship that really helped the process and gave me confidence to go along with this process and invest the time and money in doing this, which I think at some points really felt futile based on how things were going, and so it was really useful to kind of have their support behind that. That was outside of this is a client, they're earning money for us, but in terms of a personal relationship that says, here's your issues, I think you're going to get there. Here are the steps we need to do to get there.
How was the teamwork between Adam and Lenny while they were working on your case?
I think they worked fantastic as a team, and that, if a question came through, one of them always responded. Really, if Lenny didn't know something, or Lenny knew something more than Adam. There was no problem chiming in and providing their views and opinions, and their opinions didn't always agree, and that was useful to hear as well. And it wasn't a disagreement in that, I'm right, you're wrong. It was here's my view on it, here's my view on it, and let's discuss those different views and reconcile them, and which one do we agree with, or which one makes sense to us argument-wise. And that was a really useful process, because at some points, because the case had slowed down so much, we were worried about where we were going, how were we going to get this settled, what were the next steps, how much was it going to cost us. And I thought that relationship working together was phenomenal. And there was never a point where you would reach one and the other didn't know what they were doing. So the right and left hand always worked together.
Overall, how would you say the customer service of this firm is?
I think it's on top with some of the better firms that I've ever worked with on my business side, in that they're responsive, they're available, they're easy to reach. And going through a process like this, that's one of the most important things, because if something happens quickly, they make it a priority to address it. So in last minute emergencies and closing, they were there answering questions and dealing with issues through the late evening to get the deal done, because they knew there was momentum and it needed to get done.
How is Adam Lightman Bailey at giving you general corporate advice? Are we equipped to handle all condominium and co-op services?
Absolutely. I was nervous being the president of the board and saying, okay, we've gone through this litigation process, but if we have other legal issues, who do we rely on? I'm an attorney, but this is really my area of expertise. I can do the softball questions as the president of the board, but that's not really my role. And as we matured as a building and we asked questions, everyone at the firm has been available and knowledgeable to answer the questions with respect to, people not paying their common charges, issues resulting from construction work that should be done because it was affecting another apartment and it not being done, and Adam being there to write a letter, to the point of illegal rentals. So they've always been useful in helping the building, and I think we will definitely continue using Adam Lightman Bailey PC for the corporate issues surrounding the work for the building.
Do you have any last comments or suggestions?
My biggest comment is that if anyone needs a real estate attorney, I always recommend Adam. I think Adam Lightman Bailey PC is very good for real estate related issues, especially if it results to building defects, if it results with permitting, if it results with any construction or closing type of real estate issues. I have friends that have done various construction projects or have bought new condos, and I've always recommended Adam Lightman Bailey PC as the attorney to represent them if they're having issues.
Do we have your permission to post this on our website?
Absolutely.
Thank you.